freight trains crisscross the country, many transporting dangerous and hazardous cargo through countless vulnerable neighborhoods. Now the government proposes transporting tons of nuclear waste from storage sites across the country to an underground repository deep in a mountain in Nevada.
The yeas are 60, the nays are 39, the motion is agreed to.
The idea of shipping massive amounts of radioactive materials by rail has some critics calling them glow trains. And we know too well the tragedies that can occur on the nation's rail lines. In 1996, a tank car explosion threatens to level Wyomingo, Wisconsin.
I began to become concerned that this might be the last day we're ever going to have.
In Graniteville, South Carolina in 2005, a toxic cloud invades the community.
As firemen, we're supposed to help people, but this was a case where we couldn't do anything.
The possibility of a catastrophic collision may be on the horizon, and the battle over safety is brewing.
Each rail cask would contain 200 to 400 times the amount of fission products released in those bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It's not a liquid, it's not a gas, it's a very solid material. It's very difficult to disperse. We've really done our job in trying to make sure these can be done safely and securely.
If the government's strategy is realized, will the country's rail lines and the communities they serve be the site of the next mega disaster? Since the 1940s, when the fearsome might of nuclear energy was first unleashed, America has been working to harness its awesome power for peaceful domestic use. Today, cooling towers at nuclear generation plants dot the landscape and deliver nearly 20% of the nation's energy. But this power comes at a price. Left over from nearly 50 years of electrical generation are 77,000 tons of spent fuel. Highly radioactive, this material has been handled and stored safely at storage facilities scattered across more than 30 states. But in 2002, the Department of Energy was issued a contentious plan to consolidate the waste in a single secure facility buried deep in the Nevada desert. The repository is in a remote and seismically stable area, Nevada's Yucca Mountain, just 90 miles from the lights of Las Vegas. It's the DOE's responsibility to implement the plan. Gary Lantham will manage the logistics.
Some sort of permanent disposal has to be determined and set up for these wastes. Every country in the world that has nuclear operating power plants is looking at geologic repositories as the solution for permanent disposal, and we're doing the same thing here.
Nevada rejected the plan and hired a team to fight back. Robert Halstead is a consultant for the Nevada Agency for Nuclear Projects and one of the leaders in the fight against the Yucca Mountain proposal.
What's being proposed is an underground facility where nuclear waste from power plants and weapons production, nuclear waste that remains dangerous for many tens of thousands of years, would be put underground in an effort to isolate it from the biosphere.
But it's not the repository that has detractors worried. It's the radioactive materials traveling in specially designed casks along the nation's rail lines, aboard what they call glow trains.
What the Department of Energy is proposing is over 50 years to ship a minimum of about 77,000 tons of high-level waste from about 76 sites around the country to Yucca Mountain.
77,000 tons is more than 1.5 of the legendary Titanics. And transporting this material over a 50-year period is something critics point out as an accident waiting to happen. Each year, there's an average of 3,000 train derailments or crashes in the United States. Although a catastrophic crash involving nuclear waste is unlikely, the debate over a remote possibility rages on.
Spent nuclear fuel has been transported in this country for over 40 years without any releases.
Has been done safely does not mean will be done safely.
Sometime in the future, along the bustling Vegas Strip, people barely notice the screech of crushing metal. But thick billows of smoke from the nearby tracks are hard to miss, as are the emergency vehicles screaming through the streets. 2 trains have just crashed beneath the highway. One hit a separated track and derailed. The other couldn't brake in time. One of them is carrying flammable liquids. The other, nuclear waste. Neither the first responders nor the busy crowds realized that this could be the beginning of a radiological disaster. While such a catastrophe has not occurred, if rail history teaches us anything, it's that accidents happen. Since the early 1800s, when rail transport began, Americans have been in love with the train. Even wrecks were romantic in the hands of clever showmen. Like Joe Connolly, known as Head-On Joe, who staged unmanned crashes for fun and profit. But today, accidents are real, and any one could be catastrophic if a glow train were involved. Take Wyowiga, Wisconsin, a typical small town in the American Midwest. Nearly 2,000 people, tree-lined streets, and a railroad running right through it. March 1996. This small community faces total destruction of a 3-square-mile section of the town. An 81-car freight train carrying roughly 1 million pounds of propane approaches Wyowiga. Traveling at nearly 50 miles an hour, the train hits a damaged rail in the north end of town. 37 cars instantly derail and crunch into a smoldering heap of twisted metal. Moments later, leaking propane erupts into an enormous fire. A page immediately goes out to then Assistant Fire Chief Jim Bayman.
March 4th, 1996. Monday morning, I was still sleeping, but I was alerted at home via pager that there was a train wreck in Wyowiga. My heart was racing. I didn't have any idea of what was about to happen. As we left the station and headed down towards the scene, it was readily apparent that we had a big problem. And it was quite some time, probably about an hour and a half before we were able to determine what the nature of the actual fire was, which was propane. It became readily apparent that we were not going to be able to extinguish this fire, and the potential for an explosion was increasing by the moment.
Bayman decides to call in crews from 4 surrounding districts to assist.
My first thoughts were, I don't really know what to do. I'm really kind of overwhelmed.
Fearing that the fire will soon detonate the tankers, Bayman instructs his team to evacuate the immediate area. Everyone, including the former mayor, knows this initial evacuation is not enough.
I was concerned about the people who were leaving. Where were they going to go? We have a small community. We don't have hotels and motels and things like that. Not everybody has close relatives. People needed to be encouraged to go wherever they could find some kind of solace.
We had to evacuate a 1-mile area around that site. Likely at the time of the train derailment, had the potential for the explosion been realized, Wyowiga as we knew it would be gone. That scared the hell out of me. The idea that this could be it.
Bayman consults with experts who decide to drain the tanks and let the propane burn off, a painstakingly slow and dangerous process. At last, only 1 car remains, but the release valves can't be accessed. Some of its propane has escaped, but 11,000 pounds still remains, enough to kill everyone near the site. The tanker must be safely detonated, but how?
Suggestion number 1 was to get a hold of a munitions expert and create an explosion that would blow that last car up. What if he says it's too risky to do that? And they said the last recourse you have would be to call in the National Guard or call in the Air Force for an airstrike and blow it up.
Finally, a munitions expert detonates the tanker from the ground.
If this was only 1/3 of one propane tank that he ignited, obviously you can tell from that inference what potential we had with 14 tank cars going up at once.
Our community could have been lost. That would have been the worst scenario. We were very, very fortunate that not one person was hurt, and I believe it's because of how well the situation was handled.
Jim Bayman will never forget the blast that could have been, and understands what other communities might face if trains with radioactive materials are soon on the tracks.
Had this particular situation evolved with nuclear waste, I don't know that I would have known any more about how to deal with that than I did with propane. I do know that likely we would have been mismanaged.
Is any town or city prepared for a catastrophic crash of a GLOW train? While those in Waiawega beat the odds, many in Las Vegas fear their luck may run out.
Las Vegas would not be prepared to handle something like that. It would be very difficult for any fire department in the country to handle something like that.
Could the city that revels beneath the neon lights find itself in the grip of a more deadly glow? Each year, there are more than 3,000 train accidents on the nearly 230,000 miles of track in America. With freight transportation expected to double in the next 3 decades, and a government plan to someday transport 77,000 tons of radioactive material, railroads will have to expand, and catastrophic accidents could easily increase. J. David Ballard studies nuclear accident scenarios. With the Yucca Mountain proposal on the table, he has turned his attention to the rail yards.
All of these things happen all across the country. We don't live where there's a nice clean track down the middle of nowhere with nice borders far away from where the train will travel.
The town of Graniteville, South Carolina grew up beside a rail line and around one of the South's first cotton mills. Today, this community of 7,000 knows the benefits of railroads, but also the unexpected dangers. 9 years after the crash in Waiawega, Graniteville suffered a derailment of its own, only this time, people died. On January 6, 2005, at roughly 2:40 a.m., a 42-car freight train carrying pressurized liquid chlorine rumbles toward the center of town.
There was a switch left thrown in the wrong direction, and the train was diverted onto a side track that hit a parked train head on. The engineer, I think, had something like 17 seconds to brake before the impact.
Fire Chief Phil Napier is sleeping in bed less than a mile from a crash that will forever affect him and the town he's always called home. Unknown to Napier, one tanker has ruptured and is leaking a sickly orange cloud over the area.
I didn't know what to think, so immediately I told everybody to just clear out. Clear out, I guess I would be the one to go in and find out where it was and what it was.
Still unaware that the leak emanating from nearly 90 tons of chlorine gas has already begun, Napier drives directly into the toxic cloud.
I drove down this street and I parked right here. There was a man standing on the railroad and a gentleman laying over against the wall. And I rolled the window down. The gentleman said that we have had a head-on collision with the train. There's a chemical leak. I can't breathe. And he fell to the ground. Immediately it hit me. I couldn't breathe, and there was nothing I could do to help him.
The two men on the tracks are the train's engineer and another worker. Both have succumbed to the chlorine's toxicity, and the engineer will die. Napier himself is slipping into unconsciousness.
When I made a U-turn and headed north, there's no memory until probably 3 miles up the road when I came back to my senses. I just thank God that I was spared, that I was so close to death. I don't know how I got out of there, but it was just like it was out of our control.
Nearby, Alan Hudson and Samantha Woods soon feel the effects of the spreading gas.
Our house is within 450 yards of the actual train derailment.
I mean, you couldn't breathe here in the yard. We had to actually drive probably a half a mile to get a breath of fresh air.
I grabbed my son, who is now 10, wrapped him up in a blanket from head to toe, and run and jumped in the car.
Realizing the mounting danger, Napier calls in hazardous material teams from nearby Aiken County and Augusta, Georgia, before heading out to calm a town on the verge of panic.
It was basically like a Twilight Zone. On the one highway, people were coming out, crying, coughing, gasping for breath, throwing up, asking what to do, and all I could do was tell them to go to the hospital.
That afternoon, experts pumped sodium hydroxide into the tanks, turning the chlorine into a liquid similar to household bleach, which can then be transferred out and safely hauled away. By that evening, the scale of the tragedy takes hold. 550 people have been treated for chlorine inhalation. More than 5,000 have been evacuated, and 9 are dead.
I will never forget. The people in this community will never forget. We lost 9 lives in a community that has basically hundreds of people. So, I mean, it was very devastating to us. And you stop and think, what if it had happened in the city of Augusta, Georgia, or the city of Atlanta?
In addition to loss of life, Graniteville suffers an enduring economic cost. The local mill upon which the town was founded closes due to chlorine damage.
So that cost our community roughly 1,600 employees, in which it was basically at the heart of our community, the industry was. It's gone.
But everyone here knows it could have been much worse.
Had it happened early in the morning, say, within 3 blocks of where the derailment was is a middle school. You'd have had 300, 400, 500 kids that was in that middle school in the route that the chlorine went. What would have been the result of that? Would have lost several hundred lives there.
The Graniteville derailment is etched in Napier's memory, just as it is on the town monument commemorating lives lost, heroic efforts, and lessons learned.
There should not be a derailment, but as long as man is in control, there can be. Had this derailment not been nuclear waste, how many more people would have died? What would it have done to the health of the people if they would have survived?
When the train comes, you listen now. When you hear the horn, you listen to how it sounds, and I mean, it's just instinct. Everybody does. Everybody always turns and, oh, there's the train.
Our lives have changed drastically because of this train wreck.
It's not fair, and I would not wish it on anybody whatsoever.
Unfortunately, future accidents won't be wished away. There have been on average 2,200 annual derailments since the switching accident, and statistical probability tells us that crashes will continue to happen. And one thing is certain. The government's proposal requires every rail accident to be thoroughly scrutinized by those on either side of the nuclear transport debate.
And any time that we ever see any accident that we think even gets close, we're out there investigating. And we don't hesitate about that. We really believe that we have looked at the worst accidents that have occurred.
One of the best known rail accidents that's been studied as a potential challenge to a nuclear waste shipping cask has been the Baltimore Tunnel Fire of 2001.
On July 18th of that year, a train carrying flammable tripropylene derails in a 1.5 mile long tunnel and bursts into flame. It's the start of rush hour in Baltimore's downtown core. The city fire department's division chief, Donald Heinbach, responds.
Our Fire Communications Bureau received a number of calls that there was heavy black smoke coming from the north end and the south end of the tunnel. One of our most important challenges was to find out where it was. And the other thing that we had was how to actually get into the tunnel with there only being 3 access points.
Delays in accessing the fire are dangerous, allowing the blaze to burn ever hotter. Inside the tunnel, temperatures soar to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
When I got down there, it was like a movie set. I've never seen anything like that in my life. There was this train derailed, the track was torn up, for what you could see, and boxcars that were just glowing and on fire.
The fire burns for 6 days before finally being extinguished. No one is seriously injured, but the black clouds of smoke sent a clear signal to those charged with developing strategies for moving nuclear waste.
The Association of American Railroads changed their operating rules for all railroads, so now there's a rule that prevents trains carrying other hazardous materials from passing the opposite direction or passing us in tunnels. And so concerns for tunnel fires have been addressed. One thing we've done is we've made the policy decision to use dedicated trains so that we know other hazardous materials traveling with ours.
As the DOE strives to deliver sound safety reliability, critics argue that in the real world of freight travel, unlikely events are known to occur.
So on the one hand, dedicated trains are good, they're a big advance for safety. On the other hand, they don't eliminate all of the potential situations that could result in an accident involving flammable or explosive materials.
The DOE plan currently calls for trains to carry a total of 77,000 tons of nuclear waste, running up to 2 times per week and averaging 2,000 miles per trip. All of it heading for Nevada, and much of it straight for the bright Las Vegas Strip. In America, 1 in 5 homes and businesses receives power from nuclear sources. Energy is produced when, within a reactor, nuclear fuel heats water, generating enough steam to rotate turbines that create electricity. The nuclear fuel is stored in small rods, which are gathered in bundles called assemblies.
And it's comprised of bundles of pencil-sized tubes filled with pellets of uranium in a ceramic. Now, the important thing to remember about these fuel assemblies is when they go into a reactor, they're barely radioactive at all.
Once in the reactor, uranium atoms are split, causing a chain reaction which releases heat and radioactivity. After 4 to 5 years of constant use, the assemblies, now highly radioactive, can no longer produce enough heat to generate steam. They need to be replaced and are extremely dangerous.
That's what's highly radioactive and would give you a lethal dose of radiation in a matter of seconds when it is first withdrawn from the reactor, and in a matter of minutes after decades of cooling.
And this is the crux of the nuclear dilemma. A clean, efficient power source and dirty leftover fuel. But finding suitable storage and safe transportation is a challenge for all sides. 77,000 tons of radioactive waste that no one wants, that many fear, and yet must be stored somewhere. Currently, used nuclear assemblies are stored on site at more than 70 nuclear power plants, initially in large cooling ponds, and later in dry storage. Critics argue that's where they should stay.
The notion that this is safer to put on the highways and railroads of the United States rather than leave it in place where it's already highly guarded in usually remote areas is absurd to me. We need very little space to store the waste where it's currently at. Although there will still be waste there, we're just making a new waste facility where there is no waste now. So we're just adding one more piece to the problem.
Yet the plan to consolidate nuclear waste in a centralized facility has in fact been legally mandated.
Yucca Mountain is not an invention of DOE, it's a requirement of law. Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act originally in the 1982 timeframe. It was amended in the mid-80s, and that is the law that requires us to develop a permanent repository for disposing of spent nuclear waste.
Initially, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act calls for the transportation of up to 77,000 tons of waste from nuclear facilities across the country to the centralized disposal site.
The responsible thing to do is to deal with the waste that's generated and co-locating in a single location where you can dispose of it safely for the performance horizon that's established for Yucca Mountain.
As time moves on, it's unclear just how much radioactive waste will continue to roll through American cities and towns on its way to Yucca Mountain.
They're also proposing to go beyond the limits in the current law and basically plan to ship all the projected waste to Yucca Mountain. So that would mean over 50 years that somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 to 180,000 tons of high-level waste would be shipped to Yucca Mountain.
Plans call for all transported nuclear waste, whether by road or rail, to be shipped in specially designed steel casks. And the design and integrity of these casks is yet another lightning rod at the core of the debate. Built to impressive specifications, can their metal shielding prevent radioactive material being released in the event of a catastrophic crash?
Certainly the design of the casks is established to protect against severe hypothetical accidents. The real-world accidents that you would expect to have in normal transportation don't pose any threat at all to these casks. The 14 inches of steel, the 190 tons of metal that surrounds these materials is there to protect against very severe accidents.
Yet despite their unprecedented mechanical strength, the casks remain controversial to critics.
The casks, of course, are not radiation-proof. If they were radiation-proof, they'd have to be so large and heavy that it wouldn't be economical to move the waste. One critic has referred to these casks as portable X-ray machines that can't be turned off. And that's because the allowable radiation standard is about the equivalent of the exposure that you would get from a major medical X-ray.
We believe that the casks that are currently certified for those shipments are good casks. There are different requirements that we have for Yucca Mountain. The transport configuration is going to make it easier to move from transportation to disposal by using a welded steel canister that goes inside the transportation cask. Those are still being designed. We don't have those yet, but there's plenty of time for that to be developed.
The problem with that is that we've not seen any details about these cask designs. We've been told that they'll meet the specifications and regulations, but until we actually see the designs that are submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we're not going to have any evidence whatsoever that these casks actually comply with the regulations.
The NRC and the DOE advocate the casks, not only on the basis of their thickness and encasement design, but also for the unique protective features attached to each end.
If you look at a cask, it looks like a dumbbell shape. The dumbbell parts, the things around the end are the impact limiters. They're there to absorb the impact. They're sort of sacrificial. Some of these impact limiters can be 3 to 4 feet thick. A lot of them are wood. They're meant to crush. They're meant to deform. We'd be very disappointed if they didn't deform. That means they're not doing their job.
Still, some ask, is it enough? In the event of a cascading calamity, such as an accident and fire, could the casks maintain?
These bumpers are good for any normal accident, but this particular, the center portion, the tube portion where the actual nuclear waste is, that's susceptible to crush force. Crush force is being a bridge dropping down on it. When that happens, the structural integrity of the whole unit would be compromised. If you place that with the possibility of a concurrent fire, that's one of your worst case scenarios.
Previous rail accidents make it difficult to deny that perfect storm scenarios do exist. Waiawega 1996, derailment, fire, and explosion. Baltimore 2001, tunnel fire rages at nearly 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Graniteville 2005, head-on collision, breached tanker, and lethal toxins adrift in the wind.
Severe rail accidents happen, and big fires associated with rail accidents happen. A couple of months ago, we had a chlorine tanker get loose from its train and roll down and get onto the Union Pacific main line completely unattended. Things happen, crazy things happen, and that's one of the issues that makes this such a nightmare scenario.
Could any viable cask design survive the destructive forces of natural disaster and human error? Train accidents in the past have raised a central question about the plan to move 77,000 tons of nuclear waste to a repository at Yucca Mountain. Can the proposed safeguards protect the public?
We're always looking for input, ways to improve our shipment process, ways to make it safer, ways to improve communications and collaboration with states as we plan these shipments. And I think that's going to contribute to making sure that this process can be done successfully and very safely over time.
While attempts are made to address the risks, unlikely and severe incidents, both on and off the rail lines, continue to raise warning flags regarding possible problems in transporting nuclear waste. In April 2007, a tanker truck carrying 8,600 gallons of gasoline hits a guardrail beneath an overpass in Oakland, California. The tanker explodes, causing a fire so intense that it collapses the overhead bridge.
The accident in Oakland shows us the vulnerability to overpasses to collapse. Very quickly, a fire can hurt the integrity of the overpass and allow it to collapse down on whatever is underneath it. So we are talking about something that is very conceivable. It's happened in other places, in other ways. This isn't fantasy. This is actually science fact.
If fires can burn hot enough to melt concrete and steel, critics question what measures can be taken to ensure safe transportation of nuclear waste. By instituting regulations limiting the age and type of spent nuclear fuel permissible for shipping, Robert Halstead is convinced that safety can be enhanced. For him, selectivity is the key in addressing both sides of the issue.
The first thing we want to do to promote safety is ship the oldest fuel first. That's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. You simply let the fuel stay on site for 40 or 50 years. That gets you a 65 to an 85% reduction in the radiological hazard. That's the best starting point for a safety program.
The NRC counters that shipping the hot fuel, along with the cooler, older fuel, has probability advantages.
What you may find is that cold fuel is shipped around the outside layers and hot fuel in the middle. Now, why is that a benefit? Anything that reduces the number of shipments, in my mind, reduces the risk and increases the acceptability.
Critics suspect ulterior motives in the NRC's reasoning.
When utilities keep hot fuel in their pools, they have to constantly filter the water. They have to remove radionuclides. There is a higher radiation field that results in higher worker exposures. The more radioactive the fuel at the reactors is, the more expensive it is in dollars to the utilities to manage it. From the utilities' standpoint, they would just as soon ship the hottest fuel.
Though older fuel is less dangerous, it is still radioactive enough to cause harm in the event of a cask failure. Transportation expert Fred Dilger feels constant monitoring of the external and internal condition of the casks could further reduce the severity of a release.
Just like we have smart bombs and we have intelligent waste packages right now, is that we need to have smart casks that will tell us what the condition of the waste package is, so that we know how much impact force has been applied to the waste canister, so we know whether or not it's been filled. By not knowing, by not having situational awareness, we can create a situation where the first responder is forced to make a choice between the lives and health of his people and the lives and health of the public out there. And it's a terrible dilemma to put them in. And the way to fix it is with a little bit of technology that's already widely adopted.
The DOE decided that sensing devices to detect radioactivity are enough to make a smart cask unnecessary. It plans to monitor train shipments remotely via satellite. Nevertheless, critics remain unconvinced that the proposed safety measures are sufficient, and the battle continues.
I ride the train to work every day from my home. There is a very significant potential for spent fuel shipments traveling on those tracks as they transition through Washington, D.C. Obviously, I'm comfortable enough to live and work in a place where that could be done, so I'm not that concerned about the safety of the shipments. Certainly, anybody that's against the program is going to try and heighten fears and concerns about every element of the program, whether it's the performance of the repository or performance of transportation.
And yet, fears about rail safety continue to be increased by train derailments. On May 17, 2008, a freight train traveling through Lafayette, Louisiana derails, spilling 10,000 gallons of hydrochloric acid. More than 3,000 people are evacuated within a 1-mile radius. No one is seriously injured, but public confidence is tested once again.
The DOE thinks in terms of 10 to the minus 7 scientific probability, whereas the public thinks in terms of what's going to happen to my house, my business, my children in the case of a radiological incident. Those are two different world views. One is a scientific view that just looks at the numbers and dismisses low probabilities. The other is the real world view that if you're going to roll nuclear waste through my neighborhood, I want to know that my children are safe.
Despite best efforts to manage public safety and opinion, the amount of waste to be shipped, the length of the shipments, and the record of rail accidents is enough to keep the debate raging until and perhaps after the first GLOW train passes through town. Freight trains have been part of the landscape in U.S. cities since the mid-1800s, but new questions on the horizon could change that picture dramatically. Will the benefits of shipping 77,000 tons of nuclear waste to Nevada's Yucca Mountain outweigh the risks?
We have been shipping spent fuel for 30 years. We have never had an accident that resulted in any breach of a spent fuel gas. The Commission's goal is 0 releases. We're committed to that goal. We think through our rigorous standards, we're about as close to 0 risk as you get.
Many in Nevada are still expressing concern. Most locally, those living in and around the fastest growing metropolis in the United States, Las Vegas.
This would be something that would be troublesome for everyone who saw those trains roll by their neighborhood. And between 10 and 13 million people live within the radiological zone of impact for the routine shipment of this waste.
Up to 75% of the nuclear waste bound for Yucca Mountain is slated to travel less than 1,000 yards from roughly 49,000 hotel rooms along the legendary Strip.
Our greatest concern is that perfect storm scenario where combination of events and human errors create an opportunity for the pathway to be created out of the cask, most likely through the failure of the impact limiter and the failure of the lid seal.
The disaster scenario here, like some dark apocalyptic movie script, is almost too outlandish to picture. A typical day in the heightened reality of the Las Vegas Strip develops into doom and disaster on an unimaginable scale when two trains that never should have met fatally collide. 72-car freight train carrying nearly 1 million pounds of propane travels outbound from Vegas, while a glow train is on its way in. DOE policies forbid such passage, but a mistake in a schedule has gone unnoticed.
This is possible. This can happen. Bad accidents happen all the time. These bad accidents get compounded when they do happen by human failure caused by lack of information or a bad decision or something like that. So yes, these things happen. This is real.
In this worst-case scenario, 3 casks of radioactive waste are suddenly advancing on a train that, by all accounts, should not be in the picture.
Each rail cask would contain 200 to 400 times the amount of fission products released in those bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The clouds of this perfect storm continue to amass. Understanding now that he is running late, the freight train's engineer tries to make up time by defying strict speed limits. Nearing a highway overpass at nearly 50 miles per hour, the engine hits a separated track. The train derails. Cars jackknife. Dust darkens the air and toxic tankers careen across the oncoming tracks. The incoming glow train is too close to stop. Despite the screaming application of brakes, it's only seconds to impact. A toppled propane tanker explodes directly beneath the overpass, while others hiss and leak fuel from their wrecked containers. Within minutes, the inevitable fire erupts around the twisted metal. And here, in the midst, a cask from the nuclear transport train.
The most likely way in which an accident would occur that would release radiation would be for a severe impact on the canister that would remove or damage the impact limiters on the front and back of the canister, and then to have it engulfed in a flame for a long time that would weaken the bolts, nuts, and O-rings inside that keeping the waste in.
Hazardous Materials Coordinator Richard Brenner gets the call.
Since the railroad kind of parallels the freeway and the freeway parallels the Las Vegas Strip, you're probably going to have hundreds of people calling 911 saying that there's just been some type of train derailment with a fire. So at that point, the call will come in to our fire dispatch center. We'll dispatch a full response.
Emergency responders load up and head for the tracks. An alert has told them a nuclear transport train is due today, but they're unaware it's already here. At the scene, several tankers continue to leak, fueling a fire already out of control. When the response team realizes there's a burning nuclear waste cask, they inform the Emergency Management Center and pull back. The other tankers could blow at any moment.
We're staffed and equipped to handle day-to-day problems. If something is overwhelming us, we would have to take a wait and see and hold the line until we could get reinforcements in from elsewhere.
While experts are brought in from the state capitol to handle a potential nuclear accident, the fire temperature soars to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
What we would initially do would be to isolate the area and deny entry to anybody coming in that direction. Request plume modeling from the National Weather Service or others who can provide us that expertise.
Almost an hour after the initial blast, another propane tanker detonates. The overpass collapses in an avalanche of cement and steel and slams into the cask below.
It's not robust enough to withstand tens or hundreds of tons of crush force.
We've already looked at collapsing bridges on the cask. And we've already played the what-if game, and we've already had analysis done on the forces and stresses if a highway bridge falls onto a cask. The element that this adds is, does a fire add any more vulnerability? We want to be sure. We don't think so, but we want to be sure.
With a breached cask, a nuclear disaster is rising with the plume of acrid smoke, all within close proximity to the heavily populated strip.
It's a solid material, and so even if you do get a penetration of the cask, even if you do break things in some miraculous way, it's very difficult to spread this material. And so even in a very, very severe beyond credible accident, I believe that the consequences are going to be very small and very, very easy to deal with.
The DOE is reassuring, but not everyone shares its view.
A worst-case accident involving spent nuclear fuel transportation like this would release radiation over an area of 12 miles in length, up to 3 miles wide. It would cross over the Las Vegas Strip. There are between 125,000 and 250,000 people living in this area, 90,000 tourists, and probably 34,000 non-resident employees in this area. This would be an unprecedented kind of an accident.
Some maintain at this point, a contamination zone would be growing by the minute over Las Vegas and expanding into the suburbs. Would there be any effective way for civic officials to cope with this kind of situation?
It's going to go downwind, and now we're going to have to look at either in-place sheltering or doing an evacuation of an area. If you're paralleling I-15, which is our main route, and you're right next to the Las Vegas Strip, that's going to create some big difficulties. We're more in favor of an in-place sheltering type situation here where they stay inside.
And what of federal agencies? What policies are in place to deal with the cleanup of a nuclear accident of this magnitude?
The Department of Energy measures these things in terms of latent cancer fatalities, cancers that do not occur immediately but develop over time. The Department of Energy has estimated between 3,000 and 4,000 latent cancer fatalities will result from a worst-case accident of this time.
The government will provide up to $10 billion for cleanup of an accident involving nuclear waste. Is it enough?
Las Vegas is also an island in the desert. If people were to evacuate, they would have to evacuate hundreds of miles in any direction. The true cost of this is unknowable. A large incident like this would be hundreds of billions of dollars to begin with. Imagine then the arguments after the accident about who's going to pay for what and how much. How do you decontaminate these things?
This hypothetical scenario opens up serious questions, ranging from rail safety to nuclear waste cleanup. Sometime before the first GLOW train is expected to roll in the year 2020, experts on both sides